The security guard smiled as he reached for my ticket. "Congratulations to your family," he said. "You're just in time." I smiled back, exhausted after driving 11 hours straight through the night. My suitcase was still in the trunk. My coffee had gone cold hours earlier. None of it mattered because my little brother was graduating from college today. I had barely taken another step when my mother moved directly in front of me. "Ryasa," she said quietly without even looking me in the eyes, "you need to leave." I blinked. What? Before I could process her words, my father stepped beside her, blocking the entrance completely. "This is a family celebration," he said. I laughed nervously, convinced he was joking. "Dad, I am family." His expression never changed. "Not today." Families streamed around us, laughing, carrying flowers and balloons. A little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and stared openly at the strange scene unfolding near the gate. Even the security guard looked uncomfortable. I searched for Ethan. He was only a few yards away in his graduation gown. For a second, our eyes met. Then he looked away. No protest. No wave. Nothing. Dad folded his arms. "You'll only create tension," he said. "We've decided it's better if you aren't here." Every mile I had driven suddenly felt meaningless. Without another word, I turned around, walked back through the crowded parking lot, climbed into my car, and drove away before the ceremony even began. I didn't know it then. But 4 days later, the same man who told me I didn't belong at his family event would ask me to solve a $42,000 problem he believed belonged to me. The drive home felt much longer than the 11 hours it had taken to get there. I didn't turn on the radio. I ignored every rest stop, except the ones I absolutely needed. At one point, I caught myself reaching for my phone, thinking Ethan might finally call and explain what had happened. He never did. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, the graduation ceremony had probably ended. Somewhere, there were family photos with everyone smiling together. Everyone except me. I unpacked my overnight bag and tried convincing myself it wasn't worth thinking about. Maybe my parents had panicked over limited seating. Maybe there had been some misunderstanding. Maybe. The excuses sounded weaker every time I repeated them. The next morning, my social media filled with graduation pictures posted by relatives. There was Ethan wearing his cap and gown. My parents stood proudly beside him. My aunt and uncle were there. Even cousins who lived farther away than I did had made it into the photographs. One picture stopped me cold. It was captioned, "Perfect day with the whole family." The whole family. I closed the app without leaving a comment. 4 days passed. Work kept me busy enough to avoid thinking about graduation. Then, just after lunch, my phone buzzed. Dad. For one ridiculous second, I thought he was finally going to apologize. Instead, I opened the text and read, "How are you paying the $42,000? I stared at the screen. $42,000. I read it again. Then again. No explanation. No greeting. No acknowledgement that 4 days earlier he'd told me I didn't belong with my own family. Just one demand. I opened the conversation thread, wondering if I'd somehow missed an earlier message. There wasn't one. Only that single question hanging on my screen. How was I paying a bill I knew absolutely nothing about? I read my father's message at least 10 times before setting my phone face down on my desk. $42,000. The number didn't mean anything to me. I hadn't taken out a loan. I hadn't co-signed for anyone. I certainly hadn't agreed to cover a debt that size. I picked up the phone and called my mother. She answered after only 2 rings. "Hello." "Mom, what is Dad talking about?" Silence. "The text," I said. "What $42,000? Another pause. Finally, she sighed. Your father thought he'd already spoken to you. He hasn't. Well, she said carefully, it's complicated. I leaned back in my chair. No, what's complicated is being told I don't belong at my brother's graduation, and then getting a bill 4 days later. She didn't deny it. Instead, she said something that hurt even more. We just wanted one perfect family photo. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So I wasn't part of the perfect family. Don't make this harder than it already is. I'm not making anything harder. You and Dad stopped me at the gate. She said nothing. I looked out my apartment window, trying to steady my voice. If I'm not family, I asked quietly, why am I suddenly responsible for this bill? I can't talk about that. Why not? You need to ask your father. The line went dead. I sat at my computer and searched through years of archived emails. If someone honestly believed I owed $42,000, there had to be paperwork somewhere. Most of the messages were ordinary: holiday plans, birthday invitations, reminders from work. Then I noticed a string of emails from Ethan that I had barely glanced at months earlier. Each one was short. Dad said you signed everything. Thanks for helping again. I appreciate you doing this for me. At the time, I'd assumed he was talking about something Dad had handled. I never replied because I didn't understand what Ethan meant. Now those messages felt completely different. I searched for the word signed. Only one memory came back clearly. 3 years earlier, after my father had undergone surgery, he'd asked me to sign several authorization forms so he could temporarily manage a few family financial matters while recovering. He'd told me everything was routine. I trusted him. I hadn't read every page carefully. A knot formed in my stomach. Could those old signatures have anything to do with this? Before I could dig any further, my phone rang. Dad. I answered immediately. What are you talking about? Instead of explaining, he got straight to the point. The university needs payment soon. I don't even know what you're asking me to pay. You know exactly what this is. No, I don't. His voice hardened. This isn't the time to play games. I'm not playing games. Tell me why you think I owe $42,000. You promised this family you'd always help. I promised to help when I agreed to it. He ignored the distinction. If you refuse now, you're going to embarrass all of us. My grip tightened around the phone. Dad, what exactly did you put my name on? There was a brief silence. Then he spoke in a colder voice than I'd ever heard. Just handle the payment. The call disconnected. I stared at the dark screen for several seconds before whispering the question that refused to leave my mind. What exactly did you sign my name to? I wasn't about to send $42,000 to cover a debt I didn't understand. The next morning, I drove straight to Ethan's university. The finance office occupied the first floor of the administration building. Students and parents waited quietly in line, discussing tuition payments, graduation clearances, and financial aid. When my turn came, I stepped up to the counter. Good morning, I said. My name is Ryasa Brooks. I need copies of any financial documents that include my name. The employee typed for a moment before looking back at me. I'm sorry, Ms. Brooks. Ethan Brooks' account is protected by privacy regulations. I can't release information without authorization. I understand, I replied calmly. But if documents exist that identify me as financially responsible, I'd like to know why. She hesitated. Please give me a moment. She disappeared through a doorway behind the counter. Several minutes later, an older administrator emerged carrying a tablet. Ms. Brooks. Yes. I have a few questions before we continue. He asked me to confirm my full name, date of birth, and address. Then he looked down at the screen. Did you recently sign a guarantor agreement for Ethan Brooks' housing and tuition settlement? No. He frowned. Have you signed anything for the university within the past year? I haven't been on campus in years. His expression changed, almost imperceptibly. I'd appreciate it if you could wait here. He walked away carrying the tablet. For the first time since my father's text, I realized this might be far more serious than a family misunderstanding. While I sat in the waiting area, the elevator doors opened. Ethan stepped out, wearing a university hoodie. The moment he saw me, he smiled with obvious relief. "There you are," he said, walking over quickly. "Dad said you'd come." I came for answers. His smile faded slightly. "So, are they letting you make the payment?" I stared at him. "You think I'm here to pay?" He looked confused. "Of course. Dad said you already agreed months ago." "When did he tell you that?" "Back when everything got complicated with housing." "I never agreed to cover $42,000. Ethan frowned. "But you've always handled family emergencies." I shook my head. "I've helped when I chose to. That's not the same thing." He opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. For the first time, uncertainty replaced confidence. The administrator returned carrying a thick folder. He placed it carefully on the counter, but kept one hand resting on it. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "I'd like you to look at something." He opened the folder to a signed authorization form. At first glance, it looked like my signature. The handwriting resembled mine, almost perfectly. But something immediately caught my attention. The date. I pointed to it. I wasn't even in the state that week. The administrator looked up. "Can you explain?" "I was attending an international risk management conference in Chicago. My company sent me there. I have airline records, hotel receipts, everything." He nodded slowly. "I see." He compared the document against another file. Without saying another word, he closed the folder. "I'm ending this review for now." "What does that mean?" Ethan asked. "It means this account requires immediate compliance review." His tone had become noticeably more formal. He turned toward another employee. "Please notify compliance that we have documentation requiring verification." Ethan looked from the administrator to me. "Ryasa." "I told you," I said quietly. "I never agreed to this." The administrator picked up the folder and walked briskly toward the restricted offices. A few moments later, another staff member approached the counter and entered something into the system. The administrator returned just long enough to make one brief announcement. "We've placed an immediate hold on the entire account pending investigation." The room suddenly felt much quieter. No one said another word. By the time I reached my car, my phone was vibrating almost nonstop. "Dad." I let it ring. A second later, another call came through. Then another. By the time I arrived home, he had called 12 times and left 6 voicemail messages. I listened to the first one. "Ryasa, pick up the phone." The second was shorter. "You need to fix this." The third had lost all patience. "What were you thinking? Call me immediately." Not once did he ask whether I was okay. Not once did he explain why my name appeared on university paperwork. Every message was about one thing: stopping whatever had just begun. The calls didn't stop. Instead, the family group chat suddenly came alive. My aunt wrote first. "Your father says you're refusing to help Ethan." A cousin followed. "This isn't the time to abandon your brother." Another message appeared. "Everyone knows you've always taken care of these things." I read each one without replying. Then I copied a single sentence into the chat. "If I agreed to pay this debt, please send me the document showing my signature and my authorization." The conversation stopped almost instantly. 5 minutes passed. 10. 20. Not one person sent anything. Eventually, my aunt replied. "Your father has the paperwork." I answered with one final message. then he should have no trouble sharing it. No one responded after that. The following morning, I received an email from the university's compliance office requesting that I attend an in-person meeting that afternoon. They wanted to review the documents and verify several details. I confirmed immediately. About an hour later, someone knocked on my apartment door. When I opened it, Ethan was standing there alone. He looked exhausted. I wasn't sure you'd answer. I almost didn't. He lowered his eyes. Can we talk? I stepped aside. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. Dad always said you liked keeping your distance. I frowned. What? He told me work mattered more to you than family. I didn't interrupt. He said helping financially was your way of showing you cared. I let out a slow breath. So that's what you've believed all these years? He nodded. I thought that's why you missed birthdays sometimes, why you didn't come to every family dinner. I missed them because I was traveling for work. I know that now. He rubbed the back of his neck. I never questioned what Dad told me. I looked at my younger brother and realized he wasn't defending our father anymore. He was trying to understand how everything had become so distorted. I never wanted to be distant from you, Ethan. His shoulders slumped. I think I finally believed that. That afternoon, I walked into the university's compliance office. 2 investigators greeted me and led me into a conference room. A stack of files sat neatly on the table. One investigator spoke first. We're verifying several financial authorization documents connected to Ethan Brooks' account. The other added, if these signatures cannot be authenticated, financial responsibility changes immediately. I nodded. I understand. They began comparing documents, asking where I had been on specific dates and whether I recognized various forms. I answered every question truthfully. Halfway through the meeting, my phone buzzed across the table. Dad calling. One investigator glanced toward the screen. You can answer if you'd like. For years, I would have. I would have walked into the hallway. I would have listened to another demand. I would have tried to solve another crisis that wasn't mine. Instead, I reached over, pressed silent asterisk, and placed the phone face down. The investigators exchanged a brief look before opening the final file in the stack. One of them studied the documents for a long moment. Then he looked directly at me. His voice was calm. We know who actually submitted these documents. The room fell silent. Neither investigator rushed to fill it. The woman seated across from me closed the folder, folded her hands, and spoke carefully. Ms. Brooks, we've completed our preliminary verification. I waited. The signatures on several of these documents appear to have been created using copies of authorization forms you legitimately signed several years ago. I felt my stomach tighten. The forms from my father's surgery. She nodded. Those originals were authentic. However, portions of those documents were reproduced and attached to new financial guarantee paperwork related to your brother's housing agreement and tuition settlement. I looked down at the table. So I never agreed to guarantee this debt. No. The other investigator slid a document toward me. The records show you were listed as financial guarantor without valid authorization. We also confirmed you were attending a work conference in Chicago on the date this guarantee was supposedly signed. I slowly let out the breath I'd been holding. So the $42,000 is not your legal responsibility. For the first time since receiving my father's text, I knew exactly where I stood. The investigators thanked me for cooperating. Before I left, one of them explained what would happen next. The financial guarantee will be removed from your name. Responsibility returns to the parties who actually entered the housing and tuition agreements. And the altered paperwork. That matter is being handled separately. They didn't need to say anything more. I understood. The university wasn't looking at me anymore. Their attention had shifted to the person who submitted the documents. Later that evening, Ethan called. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Can we meet?" We met at a small coffee shop halfway between our homes. He arrived carrying no excuses. Only questions. "I saw some of the paperwork today," he admitted. I nodded but stayed silent. I kept thinking there had to be a misunderstanding. There wasn't. He stared into his coffee. "Dad always told me you wanted distance from us." I didn't interrupt. He said work came first, that sending money was easier for you than showing up. A sad smile crossed my face. "I drove 11 hours to celebrate your graduation." His eyes filled with regret. "I know. You saw me at the gate." "I did. Why didn't you say anything?" He looked down. "Because I believed him." The words hung between us. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry." It wasn't a dramatic apology. It wasn't perfect. But for the first time in years, it belonged to Ethan, not to our father. The truth spread through the family faster than I expected. Relatives who had criticized me after the group chat began calling one by one. My aunt was the first. "I didn't know." "I figured. You should have told us." I answered honestly. "I asked everyone for proof. Nobody asked Dad for it." She had no response. Another cousin apologized for accusing me of abandoning Ethan. Even my uncle admitted he'd assumed my father was telling the truth. One conversation after another ended the same way. "I'm sorry." It didn't erase what had happened, but it revealed something important. People had trusted the loudest voice without asking for evidence. My mother came to see me a week later. She stood outside my apartment holding a small envelope. "I brought back your graduation gift." I looked at it but didn't take it. "I didn't come for a gift." "I know." She hesitated. "I should have stopped your father at the gate." "You could have." I thought keeping the peace was the right thing. I shook my head gently. "No, keeping quiet protected the wrong person." She lowered her eyes. For the first time, she didn't defend him. She simply turned and walked away. The university officially removed my name from every financial record connected to Ethan's account. The $42,000 balance remained exactly where it belonged, with the original enrollment agreement. The responsibility shifted back to Ethan and my father. Martin could no longer point to paperwork bearing my name. He could no longer insist I had promised to pay. His explanation, that he was only trying to protect Ethan's future, convinced no one. What hurt him most wasn't the financial responsibility. It was losing the unquestioned trust he'd always enjoyed. Relatives stopped taking his version of events at face value. Even Ethan began making his own decisions instead of waiting for Dad to speak first. As for me, something changed that had nothing to do with money. For years, I'd believed that being the dependable daughter meant saying yes. Yes to every emergency. Yes to every favor. Yes to fixing problems I didn't create. I finally understood that responsibility without respect isn't love. It's control. I stopped volunteering to rescue situations that were never mine. I answered calls because I wanted to, not because I felt obligated. The silence that followed wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. Several months later, Ethan came over carrying a cardboard box. Inside were copies of old family documents my father had once kept. "I thought these belonged to you." Together, we sorted through them. Most went into the shredder. The rest stayed in a folder marked only with my own name. When he left, he hugged me at the door. No requests. No expectations. Just a quiet promise that we'd rebuild our relationship honestly. That night, I opened my phone one last time. I scrolled back to the message that had started everything. "How are you paying the $42,000? I smiled faintly. Directly, beneath it was the only reply I had ever sent. "Send me the document," where I agreed. There had never been another message from my father after that. I locked my phone, set it on the table, and turned off the light. Sometimes the strongest way to protect your future isn't paying someone else's debt. It's refusing to carry a burden that was never yours.